So many things that have gone on in Zimbabwe. Let's start off with Tendai Bt's midterm review and the 9.3% economic growth that's been forecast, predicated on mining and agriculture. Is it going to be sustained in the year ahead?
Well, there was a view that the 9.3% is a bit optimistic, given that, you know, they're coming from a low base. But I think one fundamental challenge we face is that we always get these forecasts, and when we don't satisfy or reach the, you know, the estimated focus, nobody goes back to actually find out what went wrong and what didn't, you know, why didn't the figures that were projected achieved. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think we have looked at a growth rate of about up to 6%. That's our forecast. I think BT is a bit optimistic.
And is he a bit optimistic because we are seeing volatile global conditions, because we are seeing uncertainty created by the indigenization laws? Are we going to see investment in some of these key sectors that drive the economy? Well,
yeah, if we look at last year, really, Zimbabwe had a capital formation base. That is, the new money coming into the country to invest in the productive sector was a mere 125 million US dollars, right? So the growth is really not going to come from new investment and new money getting into the country. The sad part of most of the growth in Zimbabwe is driven by commodity prices, international commodity prices. Right. As you've seen, their exports have increased about 4.6 billion, you know, and mainly their growth is targeted because of the anticipated increase in commodity prices for platinum and gold. So if something goes wrong there, then it's really just a forecast based on something that is very, very, very fragile.
Let's look at the facts that the minister has to interrogate each day. $500 million has come into Zimbabwe through mining investments. The government has earned dividends from diamond sale of $120 million. So there is a sense that this is where their revenues are coming from, outside of the tax base. It does suggest that there are people still prepared to put their money in Zimbabwe's natural resources despite the uncertainty around policy.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we have seen, for example, I mean, if you look, his budget was 2.7 billion last year, if you remember, for 2011, and now it was 4 billion. So you've had a 50% kind of increase in the budgeted revenue for the country, which is good. Yeah. Right. We've also seen that the productive capacity of the economy has gone up from 50 to 57%, from about 44% last year. So things are kind of looking in the right direction. But I mean, we must always remember that what is driving the Zimbabwean economy is doing a few things right. The potential is huge. If, for example, the political scenario was okay and we got the investment that we looked at, the potential is significant. So they're not doing badly right now, given, you know, the scenario.
Who are the people interested in Zimbabwe? Earlier this year, there was a lot of fanfare around the Chinese and how they're prepared to invest in Zimbabwe's mines, that they're going to direct about $10 billion into that economy. People said 10 billion is a little bit of an exaggeration, but there was a sense that the appetite is increasing from China. Is that still the case?
Yeah, obviously. I mean, China is very good at doing that. I mean, there were even complaints earlier on, one of the ministers telling the country that, listen, they mustn't think that China is doing this because of charity. They've actually looked at the opportunity and are getting in now. And China is always very aggressive. So, okay, there's China, but it's basically the men who are buying resource assets outside China to feed their particular economy. And those are the people who are really driving this, you know, this increase in investments, mining. Yeah.
What about privatization of assets? Now that we're talking about the Chinese, rumors abound that they're probably going to take over Air Zimbabwe, which is really struggling with servicing its loans and its debts.
Yes,
and that the Chinese could turn it around.
Yeah, well, that's one, I mean, one thing that we always fear in Africa after independence is that all the parastatals that could have been running well are not well run because of political appointments. I mean, we've talked about here in South Africa, and now, I mean, it faces us. It also has happened in Zimbabwe in that most of the parastatals, including ZESA, which is the electricity supply authority in Zimbabwe, they never do well. They never run at a profit. They always got problems. They're always being funded by the fiscus in order to survive. And obviously, it would be a good thing for the Chinese to kind of invest in order to turn it around, because despite what you think, there's quite a lot of traffic, you know, to Zimbabwe using Air Zimbabwe. So I don't see that in a bad light at all.
Aid Surprisingly, when I was looking at figures today, aid that came into Zimbabwe, not through government channels, was in the region of $300 million, and it's expected to double next year to $618 million. We've even heard the Zimbabwean ambassador say, despite the dysfunctional political relationship between America and Zimbabwe, the Americans are keen on helping Zimbabwe deal with some of its pressing social issues, poverty,
yes,
and those kinds of issues. So is there a paradigm shift within the donor community?
I don't think so. If you look, the British have always also been putting a lot of money in Zimbabwe despite the fights that Mugabe has had with them. So there's always a humanitarian kind of sector that is always being invested in. One of my fears is that the view has been that, for example, you must have sanctions on the one side, but at the end of the day, you must channel money directly to NGOs and and social development. But invariably, what happens, because the government is involved in every particular sector in the economy, the beneficiaries don't end up being the people on the ground. So despite the increases in numbers of aid, one does not necessarily will see an increase in the quality of life of Zimbabweans on the ground.
Elections is on everybody's mind. We do know there'll be a referendum next year, maybe elections thereafter, maybe early 2013. Investors are jittery because they don't want a repeat of the post-electoral violence we saw over 3-4 years ago. What are the parties offering? We're told that the MDC is talking about a localized economy, pooling Zimbabweans to work within the economy so that you tackle the issue of unemployment, attracting Zimbabweans from the diaspora to come back home. That's their strategy.
Right.
ZANU is talking indigenization, equity in key and strategic assets, and that's the plan.
Yes,
what's going to sell to Zimbabweans?
There was a denial a couple of days ago by Mugabe to say that this empowerment is not about electioneering and whatever, and we basically think that it is. There's a fundamental problem that I have in that when you give people assets, which is what you basically give, these people do not have money, so basically these assets are being delivered through the various funds that they are forming to particular, to particular sectors of the economy. And you give them these assets that are not going to perform. At the end of the day, you are just postponing the inevitable. So until the actually economy comes right, as far as I'm concerned, this empowerment is just basically something to entertain people while time goes on. There really is not going to be a significant difference to Zimbabweans because they now own 20% of Stanbic or 10% of Old Mutual. Remember, these companies must give dividends at the end of the day, and those dividends mean that they must be profitable. And we know that in the next 5 years or so, companies are going to have to refocus and grow because of what has happened in the past. So no one is going to make significant money, as far as I'm concerned, in the next 5 years.
In a word, we're talking about Zimbabwe's recovery in the year ahead. Is there recovery in the year ahead?
I think so. I think we are going to see, a potential recovery, particularly in the financial services sector and the agricultural sector, as more people get involved in the economy and as the IBD provides more money for the economy to grow. I think we're going to see better days yet in Zimbabwe.